Now we're recording.
Nice.
Hello.
Now we got to figure all this stuff out.
Yeah. Oh, you know what would help if I turned your mic or mic's on. All right. What are you talking about?
Test, 1, 2. Test. Test, 1, 2. There you go.
Okay. Yo. This mic's soft, so I have to turn this one pretty high up. Okay. Still not gonna get very high, but that's all right. It's probably best if I can't be heard. The That's on. So now we should be good to go. Thank you for listening to the Lord's Army. This is Skip.
Michael?
All right, so we are. Sorry, my mic's a little hot. There we go. How does that sound? All right, that's better. Much better. All right. Sorry for technical difficulties. We are sans Trey again today. But he's expecting. His family's expecting, so he has good excuses, good reasons, right?
Oh, yeah.
For sure. So this is going to be a different sort of podcast. Not different from what we always do, but I mean different. We've been in Second Peter for so long, it feels different. And we'll be back in. Second Peter as well. But we're taking just sort of a momentary break to go through an interview with someone who started a Christian apparel company that really is a gospel program, and so sort of in keeping with Mission Upstate and our focus and our push on evangelism, on everyday evangelism, making sure that you're just taking every step you can towards sharing the gospel at least a couple of times a week. Not that that's a checklist thing, but that's something you should be engaged in regularly. I mean, Matthew 28 was it 18:19? That was read just Wednesday. And anyway, that was. I mean, that's our Great Commission. That's what we're here to do. I mean, that's why we don't just die when we come to faith in Christ.
Yeah, exactly. We're called to be involved in good works, and evangelism is one of those.
Exactly. Cool. All right. Well, let's meet the person that we're. And for those of you watching on the YouTube thing, I'm wearing one of the shirts from this company, which I paid for the record. There was no bartering involved here. But let's see. And hold on one moment. All right. Sorry. Pardon me. Let's start that again. All right, so that's the concept. Create a Christian company that doesn't have just standard T-shirts. Not that there's anything wrong with standard T-shirts, but I don't know. It seems like maybe Christian movies, Christian artwork, Christian things can sometimes lack quality
Or style.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it's been like in the last few years that some of the Christian movies that have been put out have actually been really good.
Yeah, which is
just
objectively
nice good. Yeah, exactly. This is a really important way of sharing the gospel with others. I mean, from a very young age, I've been wearing church camp T-shirts and things like that. I'm sure a lot of others have too, and it's a great way to start a conversation. And I think that's what we're going to end up discovering from these T-shirts is that it opens the door to a further conversation about Jesus and the gospel.
Exactly. Sometimes even if you don't want it to. why don't we go into sort of um, let's keep with this a little bit. So let's go into the story of this company in particular, which is ODG Apparel.
And so friends and I would always joke around and say things like, "Oh, I'm reading one of those old dead guys." We were talking about like Spurgeon and John Calvin and Martin Luther, and we refer to these dead theologians as ODGs, or old dead guys, or old dead gangsters. We used to joke around and say, "Man, these guys were so bold with their faith. They were so like tough and like willing to risk their lives for the way that they preached the gospel." So we would call them gangsters, like OGs, you know. And then it evolved into ODG, all kinds of stuff. And then I thought, oh man, it was so funny to have a shirt with Charles Spurgeon's face on it with the word gangster under it.
The studio's smarter than I am.
And so the first shirt I ever made was
that
portrait of Charles Spurgeon with just a cursive of the word gangster. So that was like the first line that we kind of came up with, and I just decided to do it one day, and then that evolved into, I had so many people who would ask me about the shirt, who would be like, oh, that's so cool, what if I don't get the shirt? And I'd be in like these awkward situations where I had to like explain who Charles Spurgeon was and why I thought he was a gangster. And then like I ended up preaching the gospel, and I thought, wow, this could be really cool, and that kind of evolved into where we're at today.
All right, so yeah, sometimes having to explain who Charles Spurgeon is to somebody who's never known before, I mean, that's an exciting thing. That's sort of like I had a friend who had never seen Forrest Gump before, and I was jealous because I got to watch Forrest Gump for the first time.
Well, I'd say yes, Charles Spurgeon is a great one, a great man of faith, and there's a lot of he's a quotable figure. He has from his sermons, he has excellent quotations that really spur the thinking, and they're easy to remember. Um, I know one in particular that has always stuck with me is he once said, "For whatever subject I preach, I don't stop until I reach the Savior, the Lord Jesus, for in Him are all things." And of course, Paul has a lot to say about that too. But our whole life should be wrapped up in Jesus, and just something as simple as that begins that conversation. And Charles Spurgeon is a great figure because this guy from 150 years ago, excellent concept.
And it's that's something that's true for not just preachers like Charles Spurgeon and not just people that start t-shirt companies. It's something that's true for every Christian. Our whole life is about Christ, and we really shouldn't stop doing, when we do our daily job, we should do our daily job to the glory of God and with a gospel focused mindset. We should be the best. We should be the most honest. We should be the most integritous. We should have a reputation for being willing to do what's needed and not be complainers and not seem like we hate our week and all these things, because it really should cover our whole lives. And we'll get into actually some of the sort of that concept that we got into in this interview, but it really does make a barrier to the gospel if you are open about your faith in like a workplace or wherever, and you're complaining all the time.
Yeah, exactly. And Dietrich Bonhoeffer talks about this too, and he talks about the different realities that we try and divide our life into. And he kind of summarizing what he said, there's only one reality, and God is either Lord over that one reality that you have, or He's not Lord at all of your life. And so you've got to make sure and give all of your life to God. And so that can even fall into what we wear through the week, and how that can encourage us to speak about the gospel. And it's important that He is Lord over all of our life.
So you and I both have read the book Bonhoeffer by Eric Metaxas, and you mentioned something that didn't even register with me, which is sad because because it just completely blew past me. But you're exactly right. The sort of arc of Bonhoeffer's life, where he begins as your sort of cold Lutheran theologian with like no real it's not really affecting his life. He's sort of this cold theologian, and then towards the end of his life, where every action is like this loving, caring action, and he's really living out his faith.
Yeah, no, it really struck me, and we have had a conversation about this before. But when he was a young boy and when he was a teenager, he said he wanted to study theology, and that really didn't sit right with me, honestly. Because I know when I was thinking about becoming a minister, and I know many of others have thought about this too, you go and you study Bible, you do study theology, but it's with the aim of helping people, serving the church. Whereas he had a strictly, okay, theology, let me study God. And of that age, there were a lot of theologians that were very stuffy. Bonhoeffer talks about this. He writes about this, how academia was not helpful to the church. It was basically aside from the church, and really didn't have God in it at all.
Right.
It was very secular, and so but then his life really transitions into one of church service, and he ends up helping the church and leading churches, and it's all, like Skip says, out of his love for God and other people, and he realized that that was more important than having head knowledge about what he perceived as God.
Exactly. Exactly. I'm going to play these clips a little bit out of order, but one of the things that came up was actually along these lines with our interview with David.
So it doesn't seem like it's true to you. And I want to live a life. I could go into a really long story, but I had a really powerful conversation that changed the entire course of my life with a friend of mine who was an atheist in college.
It doesn't seem like
it. I shared the gospel with him, and he looked at me and said this to me. He said, Dave, I would believe it if you believed it. I said, what do you mean? He says, when I look at your life, and I look at what you're telling me and how crazy what you're saying is, that there's this eternal God that is invisible, that sent his son, all these things you're telling me. He's like, man, if I believed that, I would sell everything I had and go to the furthest mountain and tell people that. He's like, you wouldn't. He's like, so you want to know why I don't believe it? Because I don't think you believe it. And I remember leaving that conversation and thinking to myself, I never want someone to look at my life and say, you don't believe it. I want someone to look at my life and go, man, you're crazy. I don't believe what you believe, but man, you believe it. And so that's kind of how I want to live my entire life. And that's what I would encourage everyone listening. Like, man, let's live lives that people look at and go, I don't necessarily believe what you believe, but you definitely believe it.
Yeah, I think all of us, if we examine ourselves, are guilty of having those moments where we're not acting like we believe what we actually say we believe.
Yeah, and I was reading a book recently, The Magic of Thinking Big, and David Schwartz in that book says, a man who lacks enthusiasm never develops it in another. And I think that's so true of the gospel as well. We're not going to create disciples, make disciples of all nations. As we read in Matthew 28, if we aren't a disciple ourselves, we're not going to instill that enthusiasm for God and others if it's not in us.
Yeah.
And that's a test of our faith. Are we enthusiastic about the gospel, or are we enthusiastic about the church and its work? Are we enthusiastic about life in general because it is a gift from God? Are we excited, and do we have hope for the future?
Exactly. That we shouldn't be complaining about the news all the time. Doesn't mean a news article may not bother us or something, but that shouldn't be like what characterizes our life. What characterizes our life should be joy, and be a very specific kind of joy, a gospel-focused joy, and one that produces good works. Like, we should care about others. We should want to do good works and to help others. Here and ultimately, it's because we know about happiness. This is the shirt that I'm actually wearing now. This is his explaining this design.
And so the way that we use that design the most is it's simply just a yellow paint splotch on a shirt, and it's just kind of written in text, don't eat yellow paint. And so that story comes from a story that's kind of thrown around online a lot. It's kind of been like a viral story online of Van Gogh, the famous painter, wanting to late in life eat yellow paint because he was so depressed that he thought it would make him happy. And so that could be a true story. It could not be a false story. We have people tell us all the time, that's not a true story, or this, that, the other thing. It honestly doesn't matter. The truth of it is the same. And so he was pursuing life. He was pursuing happiness in this thing called paint, this yellow paint. And we hear that and we think, that's so insane. Why would he think that yellow paint's going to make him happy? And yet, you and I, all of us, do the same thing, right? When we run after things like sin that are just going to kill us in the end, they might look tasty, they might look like they're going to bring life, but they bring death, and they bring destruction, they bring brokenness and wrath and sin and everything else to our lives. And so it's a similar concept of like when I'm interacting with someone and they ask me about it, like, listen, I know it sounds crazy to think Van Gogh would eat paint because it would make him happy, but you do it all the time. You run after things all the time that don't end up tasting good at the end. They end up bringing poison to you. And so it's one of those things where when people ask you about it, they're like, wow, I did not know I was going to get that much. But it is a powerful, powerful story.
I would say sometimes you get the reaction of, I really regret asking this person about this T-shirt.
Well, and he's going to talk about that in a second.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's sometimes you get more than you bargain for when you ask a question. Be careful what you ask for.
Exactly. I mean, that into how we're all guilty of this. Here is an example. We're not alone in our sinning, in our sinning and failing to share the gospel.
There's so many times that I'll wear something and get interacted with that I'm like, dang, like now I got to preach the gospel, and like I'm just that much of a sinner myself, right? That there's times. Just the other day, I was at a meeting at like a Starbucks, and I was wearing one of our shirts with a "Stop Being Dead" on it, in just kind of a repeating form.
Yeah.
And I was in line at Starbucks with like 5 people in line behind me, and the girl working behind the counter was like, "That is such a cool shirt. What does it mean?" Another one of the employees like looks over and goes, "Wow, that's so cool." So I have 2 employees interacting with me, and they're super busy, and the line's backed up. And I wanted to just say, yeah, and just like walk away and like
you just want to
kind of ignore it because I was like, this is not the time. Trust me, guys, you don't want to know what this shirt means right now. And so I was like, the Lord just kind of like humbled me, like, no, this is why you have this. This is why you're wearing it. And so I was like, in John 3, Jesus is interacting with someone. He tells us that, we're all born, you, me, we're all born dead. And like, he came to bring us life, so we don't have to be dead anymore. And she was like, oh, cool. And I was like, yep. And I like got my coffee and I wanted to be like, you asked for it. Like, that's what it means.
Has that ever happened with you with the camp shirts? Like, people are like, man, I should not have asked him about it.
Maybe not quite that extreme. Of course, I don't think any of my shirts say "Stop Being Dead." That's a little more extreme. But I have gotten the, oh, that's nice, and then just walk away. It's obvious that they care nothing for that.
Right.
But they do like the concept a lot of times. One of my favorites is just a red E, and it says "Are you?" Just the digit R U, and then there's a red E. So are you ready? And so of course that generates some conversation. Well, what is it? What is red E? Well, what is an E? Are you E? It's what's red. And so it brings up a conversation about, are you ready for the judgment day? Are you ready to stand before the Lord? And so that generates good conversation.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, that's a common response. Sometimes it seems like it either goes one of 2 ways. It seems like either someone has just sort of like no interest and they're just like, oh yeah, that's whatever, that's cool, or it's the exact opposite and they're like, I have had people that seem genuinely like touched by the gospel and maybe hopefully prayerfully have gone on to be saved. That was a seed that was planted. Because sometimes every now and then you'll get somebody who goes, this was several months ago, sadly, but I was in a Starbucks. It seems like Starbucks is a common place for evangelism.
People coming together.
Yeah, that's right. But I was in a Starbucks, and a woman went on to share, and this wasn't started by a shirt, but anyway, we just started talking, and she went on to share about how she had just lost a loved one, and so that was like very timely. It was, you could tell that she appreciated me sharing that. I don't know if she ended up, I don't know what fruit has come from that, but it seems like it goes one of 2 ways. Either someone begins to confide in you and share with you, and it goes really well, or there's just sort of disinterest. But I think what everyone always fears is somebody going crazy on them, and that
Never happens.
yeah, exactly. It just doesn't happen that often. I mean, I'm sure it could, but that is incredibly rare.
Well, and I think the Van Gogh Don't Eat Yellow Paint shirt is going to be incredibly effective. Let me know what kind
Yeah,
of interactions you get, since Skip is modeling one.
yeah, that's right.
But it's a good story and a
I've
good.
killed the brand now, so sorry.
It's a good lesson though, because in this life there's so many, especially in our country, there's so many things that people can go after, and it ends up we waste a lot of time, money, and energy, and we end up not fulfilled at all. It's very sad when you see someone that's a hard worker, they're intelligent, um, they're they're all there. I mean, they're doing their best to find happiness, and they're just coming up short. And it's prevalent today.
Well, and we're a little over time, but that actually isn't his conversion. This is our last clip for today, but he actually talks about that in his own salvation, in his story of how the Lord saved him.
Grew up in the church, and my family comes from a really, maybe not the best Christian heritage, very kind of like, in my opinion, prosperity gospel centered and sort of theologically all over the place. And so when I went to college kind of all jacked up from that and just didn't know what I believed. And by God's grace, I became a religion philosophy major at a non-Christian school. So all my teachers made me feel dumb every day of the week. And all of my friends were hardcore, like evangelistic atheists. So it wasn't just enough for them to be atheists. Like they had to make sure I wasn't a Christian too. And so I just had everything I was interacting with every day was about making me not believe what I believed. And so I went through 2 years of just all over the place, partying, and just really just felt like, man, I don't know what I believe. I don't know why I wake up in the morning. It's so crazy. And then I remember this story I use all the time, this illustration, this drum beat, this 2 a.m., 3 a.m., the party's over, and I just have this drum, this loud noise in my head of like banging, like why? What's the point of all this, right? So if there is no God, if I'm wrestling with, man, is there a God? Is any of this true? All my identity was wrapped up in the church growing up. Went to college, I'm like, I don't think I believe this anymore, because all my teachers are telling me it doesn't exist, all my friends are telling me it doesn't exist. But then what's the point? And well, why do I wake up? And so I remember showing up to my classes at the end of my sophomore year, probably my worst year, really questioning, like, okay, I get it, guys. Everything is confusing and God probably doesn't exist, but then what's the point? They'd be like, what do you mean? I'm like, okay, but then why do we get up in the morning? Like, if suffering and horrible things are happening every day, right? And because they're happening, we don't think God exists, then why do you get up in the morning? If I know I'm just going to have a crappy life and die, why do any of us get up tomorrow?
Yeah.
And no one would have an answer. They would just keep asking questions. Well, what if? No, not what if. What's the point? Tell me. Like, there's an answer. Everything has an answer. 2 + 2 = 4. What's the true black and white answer? How did we get here? Why are we here? The whole thing. And so I just started reading, Gandhi and philosophers and the Quran and the Bible for the first time really in my whole life. And it was like I started to see Jesus in the Gospels, and I was like, wow, this is different than what I grew up hearing. Jesus is way like more like, it's my way or the highway. Jesus was way more like truth and power and just like that, barbarian sort of, king that I would see in the Gospels. And I was like, wow, he is like not joking around. And so it just hit me one day, man, I think I believe in Jesus. There's just nothing else that points anywhere but him. And then it was kind of, it's all just been ever since that.
It's amazing to see someone who's coming from such a varied background ends up falling um, to Christianity and ends up serving God. When you examine the trail of facts, you come to Christianity and you come to what God has done for you. It's impossible. An unbiased observer, it's impossible to look at all these facts and not want to follow God and serve Him.
Yeah, once you realize that that's the only explanation for objective morality. It's the only explanation for existence. It answers all the scientific questions, all the philosophical questions, and more importantly, you know that it's true once once you're saved. You have full assurance, and there is there is just no point into life outside of our glorifying God. And for more resources and information, and for the full interview, we'll post the full interview on our YouTube channel as well, unedited. For more information, go to lordsarmy.org. That's lordsarmy.org. Thank you for listening. I meant to fade out with our music, but that's okay. A nice, quiet, soft, like NPR type list.
Well, you'll be able to edit it.
Yeah, I could edit it afterwards. Let's see.
Of course, that might be a bad idea because we had some dead space in between videos and stuff.
Yeah, I'm not sure what episode number that was. Episode 19, I think.